Before the story begins, I would love to know, where are you watching from today? The wind that night was sharp enough to cut through leather and bone. A restless whisper moved over the prairie like an old story told too many times. The sun had long since dropped beyond the western rim of the world, leaving only a wash of bruised purple and ember orange against the sky. John Holmes had been riding the southern fence line, counting the hours until his own firelight would be waiting. He was 30 years old, the kind of man shaped by the land, broad-shouldered from years of lifting hay bales and splitting rails, skin weathered by summers that burned and winters that bit. His horse moved steady beneath him, hooves muffled in the brittle grass, steam rising from its nostrils. He thought only of coffee and the quiet of home until the wolves broke the silence. It wasn't their howl that reached him first, but the low, rolling growl of an animal close to the kill. His hand tightened on the reins. The sound came again from a dip of land near a low ridge, carried sharp and cold on the wind. He leaned forward in the saddle, eyes narrowing against the dusk. That's when he saw movement, small, jerking, unnatural. His first thought was deer tangled in brush. But as he drew closer, the shape took form, and the air left his lungs. She was bound to a weathered stake driven deep into the earth. Wrists lashed with rawhide, ankles tied, a strip of faded cloth at her mouth. Her dress, simple buckskin, was torn at the sleeve. Her long black hair spilled like shadow down her back. Wolves circled in the dim light, gray coats rippling, eyes like pale lanterns. Her chest rose and fell too quickly, the white cloud of her breath trembling in the cold. There was something in her eyes, neither plea nor defiance, only a stillness that unsettled him. He swung down from the saddle in one motion, rifle sliding from its scabbard. The first shot cracked the night wide open, sending the nearest wolf skidding back with a yelp. The rest hesitated, hackles raised before melting into the dark. John moved fast, boots sinking in the frozen ground. The rawhide cut deep into her wrists. He saw blood where she'd struggled. He sliced the bindings with his knife, catching her as she swayed. She was lighter than he expected. When he lifted her, she did not speak, did not meet his gaze. Only her breath, ragged and cold, proved she was still with him. He set her in the saddle before him, his coat wrapped around her shoulders. The horse turned toward home, hooves carrying them into the dark. She didn't look back, and he didn't ask why. Some truths, he knew, would come only if they wanted to. The cabin's fire was aglow in the distance when they arrived. He helped her down, steadying her with a hand that felt clumsy on her arm. Inside, he laid another log on the fire, its light spilling across the rough plank floor. She stood just inside the doorway, her gaze moving over the small room, the table with its 2 chairs, the shelf lined with jars, the rifle above the mantel. Her silence pressed on him more than any question could. He set a bowl of stew on the table, gestured to it, then stepped away. Later, he saw the bowl empty, the spoon resting quiet against the rim. She slept in the small room at the back. He heard her wake once, murmuring words he couldn't understand. Comanche, he guessed. He lay awake in his own bed, staring at the ceiling, the wind scratching at the shutters. Morning brought snow, a thin curtain drifting across the yard. He found her standing at the barn doorway, the coat still over her shoulders, watching him work. He mended the fence in silence, aware of her eyes on him. When he glanced over, she didn't turn away. That was the first time he saw her face in full light. Fine-boned, with eyes dark enough to hold a storm. There was no fear in them now, only something unreadable, something that rooted itself in him before he knew it. They spoke little in those first days. Her name, when she finally gave it, was Siona Blue Sky. She said it without ceremony, as if it meant nothing, though he knew names carried whole histories. He learned from a trader in town that she'd been cast out by her people, Comanche, who believed she carried evil spirits after surviving a fever that had taken others. Some said leaving her to the wolves was mercy. The word sat in his chest like a stone. Taking her into town brought its own trouble. Norton Bruggs, who never missed a chance to stick a knife with his tongue, made his thoughts known loudly enough for the whole street to hear. "Careful, Holmes. Some curses don't wash off." John's hand flexed against the crate he was lifting, but he said nothing. The marshal, Bill Connor, took him aside later, speaking low. "You keep her here, you'll have both sides watching you." Neither friendly. Back at the cabin, Siona asked why he'd helped her. He didn't answer right away. Instead, he handed her a small sack of coffee beans he'd bought for her after seeing her eyes linger on them in a store. She took it with a quiet nod. That night, when the fire was low, she asked again if he feared her. He said, "Only I fear losing what's worth keeping." The winter days fell into a rhythm. She began to help with the work, mending tack, feeding the chickens, carrying water. She moved with a grace that made even the smallest task look deliberate. One morning she left a small wooden feather on the table, carved with care. He kept it in his pocket from then on. When spring came, the snow gave way to green shoots, the air smelling of wet earth. One afternoon, as they worked to mend a section of fence, she laughed at something, soft and quick, like a bird taking flight. He realized it was the first time he'd heard her laugh, and it stayed with him all evening. It was just after the first blossoms opened on the wild plum trees that the riders came, 5 of them, dark against the horizon, their horses moving with purpose. He saw them from the corral, his hand finding the rifle out of habit. Siona froze where she stood, her eyes narrowing. The man at their head was older, his braids streaked with gray. Cotican Gray Wolf, a name John had heard in town. The others carried themselves like men used to being obeyed. They stopped a few yards from the fence. Cotican's gaze swept over John before settling on Siona. He spoke in Comanche first, the words low and heavy. Then, in rough English, he said, "She comes with us. She's free to choose," John said, his voice even. "She has no choice. The spirits marked her. She belongs with her people. She belongs where she says she does." For a long moment, the only sound was the wind in the grass. Then Siona stepped forward. Her voice, when she spoke, carried like a blade through the air. "My place is here." Her eyes didn't leave the elders. Something shifted in Cotican's expression, anger perhaps, or respect. He turned his horse without another word. The others followed, their hoofbeats fading into the distance. The prairie felt too wide after they were gone. That night the air was warm enough to leave the door open. They sat by the fire, the silence between them no longer sharp but steady. John watched the firelight on her face, the way it softened her features. She met his gaze and didn't look away. Days later, under a sky so blue it hurt to look at, they stood by the corral, with Marshal Bill Connor as witness. She wore a simple white dress she had sewn herself, the fabric catching the breeze. His shirt was pressed as best it could be. They spoke their vows quietly, but the words carried weight. When it was done, she smiled. Not the guarded curve of her lips he'd seen before, but a full smile that reached her eyes. It was like watching the first green after a long winter. They rode out together that afternoon, the land stretching before them in every direction, the scent of wildflowers on the wind. He didn't know what lay ahead, trouble or peace, but he knew one thing: she was his, and he was hers, and no curse, no whisper could touch that. Some loves, he would tell you if you asked, aren't chosen by the world. They're chosen by the soul, and when you find one, you hold on, no matter the cost.